Hello and welcome to the Oxford Forum for Questioning Extremism's penultimate event of Hillary term. I'm Freddie Felton, President here at the OFQE, and it's my pleasure today to be interviewing Dr. Gail Bradbrook, co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, on whether Extinction Rebellion is an extremist organisation. In this event, we will begin with a speech from Gail on the foundations of XR, its vision, aims and methodologies, alongside her thoughts on the question under investigation today regarding the charge of extremism. Following this, Gail and I will be in conversation for around 20 to 25 minutes, in which we'll discuss the relationship between the adjective extremist and the activism of XR, as well as giving her the opportunity to address critiques leveled at XR from the outside, as well as inside the broader climate movement. We'll finish this event with a Q&A segment in which you, the audience, will be able to pose your questions directly to our guest by pressing the raise hand feature, and I can subsequently unmute you. So it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Gail Bradbrook to talk us briefly through Extinction Rebellion and how she understands the challenge of being labelled an extremist organisation. Gail, take it away.
Freddie, thanks so much, and thanks for everybody who's joining us. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this issue. Obviously, I don't think we're extremists. I want to dedicate what I have to say today to some brave rebels who actually glued themselves in a courtroom today and have been sentenced to 14 days in prison, one of whom is Tracy Maligan of our XR working class group, 44 mum of three. She said, "I'm here today as an angry mum fighting for my kids. All children should have a chance at a future on a habitable planet. Our establishments are facilitating social murder and ecocide. The courts are failing us. I don't do this out of contempt, but out of love." And the other woman was Sally Davidson, 33. She said, "I'm choosing to disobey in the dock today to ask the court to not only say they agree with the science about the climate crisis, but to act like it's real by allowing the defence argument of necessity to be heard in activist trials. I hold the UK courts to be complicit in our government's failure to act urgently and proportionately on the climate and ecological emergency." So thank you so much to those courageous rebels, Tracy and Sally. So I wanted to start by outlining where we are regarding climate and ecological crisis, an important context. There was a science paper from Nature this January that says we are heading, whatever we do, for 2 degrees of warming. So that means that the Paris Agreement, where we were to stay near to 1.5 degrees, has failed. People are going to suffer and die as a result of that disparity between 1.5 and 2 degrees, and especially in the global south. So you're looking at parts of Southeast Asia becoming uninhabitable, a massive decline in food crops, especially in Africa, 1.7 billion people experiencing severe heat waves, up to several hundred million more people becoming exposed to climate-related risks and poverty. And then another paper, a Frontiers paper from January this year, 17 ecological scientists from across the globe said that the scale of the threats to the biosphere and all its life forms, including humanity, is in fact so great that it's difficult to grasp, even for well-informed experts. So like, what are we talking about? Well, last June, the government's own climate change committee said that we should start to prepare for a 4-degree warmer world, even though in 2008, they said that if that was reached, extreme consequences potentially beyond our ability to adapt would arise. And according to Professor Kevin Anderson, it's widespread view. There's a widespread view that 4 degrees C is incompatible with an organised global community. What we're talking about, incredible commentators like David Attenborough say, is we're talking about the collapse of our civilization. Johan Rockström, the professor at the Potsdam Institute, estimates that 4 degrees of warming, half the planet dies, billions of people. We're talking about crimes against humanity that are being committed right now by the policies of the government. Now, since the Paris Agreement, banks have spent 2.7 trillion on new fossil fuel explorations, 15% coming from the UK. The UK government cancelled lots of green programmes and added a duty to optimise fossil fuel extraction into an infrastructure bill. It was a way of pushing fracking and other things. It's pressing ahead with HS2. It's the biggest deforestation of the UK since World War I, even though we know we're one of the most nature depleted parts of Europe. You've got incinerators opening across the UK. There were some coal-fired power stations and new coal mining in Cumbria and Durham. A new road building programme announced 27 billion, and we're the worst subsidisers of fossil fuels in Europe. This is a country that claims it's doing leadership on the crisis. So you had a report came out today from the Public Accounts Committee saying that the government is failing to create a credible plan, even though it's almost 2 years since it announced its net zero target. And according to the Tyndall Centre, our emissions are more than twice what they should be, according to our Paris compliant carbon budget. So it's a mess, folks, right? And XR was launched in October 2018 with 3 simple demands. Tell the truth, we're in an absolute mess, a climate and ecological emergency, halt biodiversity loss, and we want a really quick net zero target. We'd said not 2025. And we want the how we do that to be decided by a citizens' assembly that's legally binding. So it's important to say that we are a rebellion and not a protest group, right? So you've got Enlightenment thinkers like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who talked about the social contract between government and citizens, who said there's a right or a duty of a people to rebel against a government that acts against their common interests or threatens the safety of its people. And our theory of change is that mass participation in civil disobedience forces a government to act. And we believe we have the right to do that. So thousands of rebels have been arrested in peaceful civil disobedience, actions like sitting in a road, criminal damage from spray chalking buildings to breaking windows, trespass, sitting in trees that are going to be cut down. We've recently launched a deck strike, we're planning a tax strike. All of these things build on a noble tradition of civil disobedience. The Chartists and suffragettes broke windows. That's why people here today have the vote. You had a mass trespass on Kinder Scout. That's why you have the right to roam. Gandhi did a salt tax rebellion. That's why Indian independence happened. The civil rights movement under Martin Luther King's leadership and others had a strategy of arrest. The XR tactics are especially inspired by the gay rights movement ACT UP, who felt compelled to break the law to save the lives of gay people who were being murdered by homophobes and socially murdered by the government's responses, really poor responses to the AIDS crisis. So Lord Jonathan Sumption last year at the Royal Society of Medicine said it can be morally acceptable to break the law. And there's actually a defence that means you haven't broken the law if there's a reason to do it. It's called the necessity defence, or it's about duress of circumstances. You had Lord Hoffman in 2006 saying, civil disobedience on conscientious grounds has a long honourable history in this country. People who break the law to affirm their belief in the injustice of the law or government action are sometimes vindicated by history. The suffragettes are an example. So we've been effective, right? Extinction Rebel. What we've done, we haven't won, but we have been effective. This movement spread to 75 countries. There's over 1,000 groups across the world. People have been arrested or risked arrest. People in their 90s, people who use wheelchairs, grandparents, rabbis, priests, lawyers, scientists, doctors, ordinary people, mothers, grandparents, But for every arrestee, you have to have like 10 people behind the scenes who support them. You're not required to get arrested to be part of XR. We need people who don't want to be, and it's certainly a movement that wants to include everyone in that way. And what's happened as a result of XR is that government and institutions across the world have declared a climate emergency, and the whole space has changed, right? So we were named as the #1 influencer on the crisis at COP25 by Analytica. And you can see a correlation on the graph from YouGov about, public opinion on the crisis and our actions. I've personally been arrested 4 times, including for breaking a pane of glass at the Department for Transport. I've been told I face 6 months to a year in jail for that. I don't mean to be immodest, but I'm saying this in terms of effectiveness, right? I was then named one of the 50 most influential people in Britain and put on the Women's Hour Power list last year for women based in the UK making a significant positive contribution. So, are we heroes or are we extremists? Right? That's the question. And actually, I'd say we're just ordinary people who feel we have to act because our leaders are failing to do so. There's a risk, though, that when you do these kinds of actions, it's not explained to people, that some people will see what you're doing as extreme. Malcolm X spoke at Oxford University in 1964, and he said, I don't believe in any form of unjustified extremism, but when a man is exercising extremism, a human being is exercising extremism in defense of liberty for human beings, it's no vice. And when one is moderate in the pursuit of justice for human beings, I say he's a sinner. So it's been suggested that we're extremists, that we should be reclassified as organised criminals. As well as being ridiculous, this would mean that parts of the police force who are focused on violent terrorism, bribery, corruption and organised theft would have to, put their resources to investigating, frankly, a bunch of hippies who want to sit in the streets, And that's led Paul Stevens, who's one of our spokespeople, a retired detective sergeant from the Met Police, saying, tasking the police with investigating several thousand peaceful protesters who dare to speak truth to power will be laughed at by real police officers and distract them from the necessary task of keeping us all safe. It also wastes time for people in institutions when they have to refer people like us to the PREVENT programme. It's a real nonsense. So, in a way, it would seem a joke to me that we're being accused of extremism if it wasn't so dangerous. And I want to make this really important point and put this on the public record. I think that bogus and ridiculous accusations of extremism put Extinction Rebellion rebels' lives at risk. When Joe Cox, the British MP for Batley and Spen, was murdered in 2016 by a neo-Nazi, Thomas Mair, he said in court, "My name is death to traitors, freedom for Britain." And then you had commentators like David Iranovich in the Times saying that the political language of the time had emboldened his extremism leading to this murder. So when people are whipped up to fear and hate others, as can happen through calling people extremists, our lives are put at risk. And this is way more serious for our rebels that aren't in the UK, that are in places with less freedom and greater danger. 4 environmentalists are killed every week across the world. Our XR International Solidarity Network have advised us that rebels in their networks across the world are under much higher risks if they're associated with an organisation deemed to be extreme for political reasons. So the British government needs to stop paving the way for our nature defenders across the world, our courageous rebels, to be murdered. It's clearly a politically motivated move. It's not about the safety of the British people. And if it was, they'd take actual action on this urgent climate and ecological crisis. So you've got to ask what's behind these accusations. It's clear to me the real purpose is to silence us, especially in this year when the UK government's leading the COP process. If we're labelled as such, we won't be able to speak in the mainstream media. And the government does not want to be held accountable. That's clear on a number of fronts. And it's part of an authoritarian culture war that's being waged. An editorial this February in the British Medical Journal considers that this government should be held accountable for the social murder of its own citizens because of their politicians' willfully neglecting scientific advice and so on in their approach to COVID-19, including this really appalling blanket imposition of do not resuscitate orders in care homes. They've been involved in killing British people. And if you look at the right-wing tabloids, do you see any sense of holding this government to account? What we've got is the media concentrated in the hands of a few billionaire owners and, peddling their own agenda. In September 2020, the UK government was formally warned by the Council of Europe for threatening press freedom after it blacklisted a group of investigative journalists and denied them access to information. It had been issued with a freedom alert in May when journalists were banned from asking questions at a coronavirus press conference. We remain one of the worst countries in Western Europe for freedom of the press, according to Reporters Without Borders, ranked 33 behind Jamaica, Ghana, Namibia, South Africa, and so on. And so this, this tie-up of this accusation of extremism in the press needs to be noted. There was an article in Byline pointing out that this new right-wing news channel that wants to start GB News, one of the original founders, Sir Robbie Gibb, had been in a business partnership with John Zach Woodcock, and who's Lord Wolney, and William Shawcross. So the people that are supposed to investigate us trying to push this right-wing agenda, it was Woodcock that was supposed to conduct a review into political extremism and a report on it, and then you also had Shawcross as a reviewer in the prevent strategy, a process which former regional chief crown prosecutor Nazir Afzal described as rigged. I'm nearly done, by the way. So there are serious concerns about the government trying to undermine free speech, including in a really Orwellian move to apparently protect free speech, including of groups that promote the hatred of gay folks. This move has been named by Yale professor Jason Stanley as a classic moves on behalf of fascism in his, and he's been quoting from his book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. This week, a global coalition for transparency and anti-corruption has put the UK government under review. Kevin Keith, the chair of the UK Open Government Network, said the UK's government reputation for openness and accountability is in free fall. You've got this looking at judicial reviews, reviewing judicial reviews. Judicial reviews are a really important part of holding the government to account. That's under review. Controversial review of human rights law, the Spy Cops bill, which was trying to give immunity to undercover police who might sleep with and have children with activists, has happened in the past, a form of rape. And there are close ties between the current cabinet and the Policy Exchange think tank, who wrote a report on us, who said that we were extremists. We don't know who funded that, because they're one of the most opaque think tanks in terms of funding, but we do know they've had funding in the past from Drax, the Trade Association, Energy UK, gas companies, and so on. So why are we seen as extremists, just to finish? It's simply because we suggest that the economic system and our democratic processes have been and are insufficient to tackle the crisis. We question economic growth, and we want more deliberative democracy like citizens' assemblies. So if we're extremists, we're joined in these views by other well-known extremists, such as the IMF, the World Economic Forum, The Economist magazine, economists at the Deutsche Bank, the Treasury-funded Dasgupta Review, and Prince Charles. I mean, come on. When life on Earth is being killed, questions about democracy and political economy are legitimate and necessary. And as these crises hit, the risk of fascism rises. Trying to position XR as extremists, trying to silence us, is another move in the direction of fascism.